In the spring of 1990, somewhere in Europe, a fortune went up in smoke. Not in the way cigars are supposed to burn, one at a time, slowly, in good company. This was different. Crates of the most expensive cigars in the world, hand-rolled in Havana, wearing the most exclusive band money could buy, were deliberately destroyed by the very company whose name was printed on them. Reports spoke of cigars in the hundreds of thousands. Collectors would have paid almost anything for them, and the man behind the brand let them burn. His name was Zino Davidoff, and to understand why a man would destroy his own treasure, you have to go back to the beginning. Because this story doesn't start in Havana or Geneva or in any cigar factory at all. It starts with a family running for its life. Zino Davidoff was born in Kiev in 1906 into a Jewish family of tobacco merchants living under the Russian Empire. It was a dangerous time and a dangerous place to be Jewish. In 1911, when Zino was 5 years old, the family fled west and settled in Geneva, Switzerland. His father Henri opened a small tobacco shop, blending cigarettes by hand for a clientele of students.
And finally, Cuba, where the young man spent roughly 2 years living inside the world of the Habano, the plantations, the warehouses, the fermentation rooms. He slept where the tobacco slept. He learned how a leaf feels between the fingers when it is ready and how it smells when it is lying. He watched old sorters grade wrappers by candlelight into dozens of shades of brown and understood that this, not the band, not the box, was where quality lived. He learned to read a leaf the way his father's customers read newspapers. Havana got into his blood, and it never left. Zino returned to Geneva in 1930 and slowly turned the family shop toward the thing he now loved most, premium Cuban cigars. He obsessed over how they were kept. In an age when fine cigars often sat drying on open shelves like biscuits, Zino insisted they were alive, that they needed humidity, temperature, care. He championed what would become the modern desktop humidor, the idea that a private client should own a small, perfect climate for his cigars, a cedar-lined box that treated tobacco the way a cellar treats wine. It sounds obvious today. It wasn't then. Every humidor sitting on a desk anywhere in the world is, in a sense, a descendant of that Geneva shop. He was quietly rewriting the rules of an entire culture. Then the world caught fire, and Geneva did not. While Europe fell into the Second World War, Switzerland stayed neutral, and Zino's little shop became something extraordinary. Through fortune, nerve, and connections, Davidoff secured enormous stocks of Havana cigars, famously linked to shipments originally destined for the French market, now stranded by war.
Suddenly, in a continent of ration cards and rubble, there was one address where the finest cigars on earth still glowed behind glass. Diplomats came, officers came, exiles and spies and businessmen came, men who might have been enemies anywhere else, standing in the same small shop, pointing at the same boxes. Zino served them all with the same discreet courtesy, remembered every preference, and never asked questions. In a world where everything was scarce, he understood that what he really guarded in that basement was not tobacco. It was civilization, rolled and banded, waiting for the lights to come back on. The shop on the Rue de Rive became the cigar capital of Europe, and Zino Davidoff became its king. And when peace returned, he made his first masterstroke. In 1946, he launched a line of Havana cigars, named not after generals or heroes, but after the great wine estates of Bordeaux, Château Latour, Château Margaux, Haut-Brion. It had never been done. Cigars presented like Grand Cru wines, with the same reverence, the same ritual, the same prices. In that moment, Zino Davidoff essentially invented modern cigar luxury. He understood something his rivals didn't. He wasn't selling tobacco. He liked to say he wasn't even selling cigars. He was selling pleasure. He was selling time.
The Davidoff cigars were entrusted to a small elite factory on the outskirts of Havana called El Laguito, the same secret house that rolled Cohiba for Fidel Castro. For 2 decades, the world's most secretive cigar and the world's most luxurious cigar came out of the same doors, shaped by the same master hands. The range grew with the legend. There were the numbered Davidoffs. There was a cigar named after a champagne, Dom Perignon, and there was the 1000 series, small, refined smokes for the middle of a working day. Every one of them wore the same blank white page of a band. The white band conquered the world.
In 1970, Zeno sold the company to the Oettinger family of Basel, staying on as its global ambassador, its author, its face. Boutiques opened in the great capitals. The Davidoff No. 1 and No. 2, slim and elegant, became the cigars of presidents and financiers. They were not big cigars. They were long, graceful, almost architectural things, built in the same slender formats as Cohiba's famous Lanceros, demanding the very best rollers, because a thin cigar forgives nothing. Get one leaf wrong and the whole experience collapses. Get everything right and you have refinement itself, cedar and cream and flowers, a cigar that whispers. Through the 70s, if you wanted to signal that money was no object, you didn't reach for the loudest cigar in the room. You reached for the quietest one, the white one. Which makes what happened next almost unbelievable, because in the 1980s, the marriage began to fail. Quality grew inconsistent, supplies stumbled. Cigars arrived that did not smoke the way a Davidoff was supposed to smoke, wrappers with blemishes, draws too tight, batches that varied box to box. For most brands, these are problems. For a brand whose entire promise is perfection, they are existential. And Zeno did something that luxury houses simply do not do. He said so, publicly. The most famous tobacconist alive stood up and declared that the cigars carrying his own name were no longer worthy of it. Imagine the chairman of a great champagne house announcing that his own bottles had gone flat. Behind the scenes, the disputes with the Cuban monopoly deepened. Control, consistency, the trademark itself. By 1989, the unthinkable had become the inevitable. Davidoff divorced Cuba. In 1990, production of Cuban Davidoffs ended forever. And then came the bonfire. The remaining stock, a fortune in perfect white bands, reported in the hundreds of thousands of cigars, was destroyed rather than sold. Was it purely a statement of quality? Cigars judged unworthy of the name? Was it also strategy, a clean break in a brewing trademark war? The accounts differ, and the truth probably holds both. But the message written in that smoke was unmistakable. The name matters more than the treasure. Standards matter more than soil. Nobody, not even the island that invented the cigar, gets to decide what a Davidoff is, except Davidoff. The experts wrote the obituary immediately. A Davidoff without Havana, they said, was a Rolls-Royce without the engine. The company bet everything on a different island, the Dominican Republic, and on a quiet master blender in Santiago named Hendrik Kelner. Kelner did not try to. He treated fermentation, the wild, hot, unpredictable heart of tobacco making, as a science to be controlled, measured, and repeated, batch after batch, year after year. Refined instead of rugged, aromatic instead of overwhelming, blends assembled like watch movements with a Swiss obsession for consistency, so that the cigar you smoked in March would taste like the one you smoked in November. The Grand Cru series arrived, then the Anniversario, then the special cigars, quiet legends passed between people who knew, and one by one, the doubters went silent. Years later, the house even did what everyone said the Dominican Republic could not do, growing its own wrapper leaf on Dominican soil. The engine had not been lost with Havana. It had simply been rebuilt, piece by piece, on new ground. Zeno lived to see it. He died in Geneva in 1994 at 88 years old, with his name not buried beside the Cuban past, but very much alive, growing, and once again defining the top of the pyramid. The boy who fled Kiev with nothing had proven a strange and beautiful thing. A name can emigrate. If the standards travel with it, the soil is negotiable. Today, the white band sits at the summit of the non-Cuban world. The house grows and ferments its own Dominican tobacco, and it is kept pushing. In 2013 came Davidoff Nicaragua, the first core line built on another country's leaf. In 2015, the house relaunched the Winston Churchill line, honoring history's most famous cigar smoker. There are cigars for the late hour, cigars rolled in white tie limited editions that rank among the most expensive regular productions on earth, and boutiques from Geneva to Hong Kong built like jewelry stores, and collectors stir chase the ghosts.
Original Cuban-era Davidoffs, the survivors that escaped the fire, now trade at auction like bottles of 45 Mouton. The company burned a fortune, and in doing so, created one. A word of caution belongs here, because wherever legends trade for fortunes, forgers follow. Genuine Cuban-era Davidoffs surface through serious auction houses and documented collections, not through a friend of a friend with a dusty box and a perfect story. If one ever finds you instead of you finding it, let the romance go and keep your money. So the next time you see that plain white band, remember what it actually says, in letters too quiet to read from across the room. It says, a 5-year-old refugee crossed a continent, learned a craft in Havana, kept Europe's flame lit through its darkest war, and taught the world that a cigar could be a Grand Cru. It says Cuba once honored one man above all others, and that the same man walked away when the handshake stopped meaning perfection. Some brands put their history on the band. Davidoff put a blank page there instead, as if to say, the proof is not in the packaging, the proof is in the smoke. Light one, and somewhere behind the aroma of cedar and cream, you can still hear the crackle of that impossible bonfire, the sound of a man burning his past to protect his name. That is not marketing. That is a standard, and it is why more than a century after a little shop opened in Geneva, the quietest band in the room is still the loudest statement in the world of cigars.